So once again, welcome. I am Irini Allen, and I'm the director of the Institute for Classics Education. We're a 501c3 nonprofit based in the United States, and our mission is to provide free resources and support to teachers and learners of ancient Greek texts in English translation. Just letting people in. In addition to hour-long seminars like this one, we run 12-week courses on the Iliad in the fall and the Odyssey in the spring, and we are happy to develop courses by request. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I will put my email and our website into the chat. Today, I'm so happy to welcome back Dr. Charlotte Spence. Charlotte is an honorary research fellow at the University of Exeter in the United Kingdom. Her research focuses on the way in which ancient individuals conceived of the different roles of the dead and the divine in the creation of curse tablets. Alongside her primary research interests, Charlotte loves coinage and sharing the ancient world with as broad an audience as possible. Charlotte, all you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It is really wonderful to be back. I'm really looking forward to this. I will it's not a warning, it's just sort of introduction that it is it might get quite technical in the middle as we're talking about these inscriptions and things. But I hope you will really enjoy it, because it's sort of something that I am passionate about in a very nerdy way and ties in really nicely with curse tablets. So hopefully we'll all have a really good time. I will make this big so we can all share it. Okay, so I am going to talk about this translating of curse tablets, and the kind of focus of this and the kind of angle of translating I've gone for is more about how we get from looking at the surface of a stone or a lead tablet to the published edition that we see and engage with as ancient historians or interested parties. So that's the kind of niche that I've come into. So let's kick off with a little bit about me. So I have just finished my PhD in classics and ancient history, as Irini said, at the University of Exeter. And it was all about conceptions of the dead and the divine in curse tablets. And I'm currently working on making this into a book, which is very exciting. And before that, I was at Exeter, at Birmingham. So I did a BA in ancient history at the University of Birmingham before coming to Exeter to do research, which started off as an MA and ended up being way too big and got turned into a PhD. So I've got my little trigger warnings at the bottom just for this presentation. Doesn't really cover most of these, but if you do think curse tablets are interesting and go off into the world of the internet to read them, be aware that they can be very graphic and very violent at times, particularly with violence towards women and kind of physical and quite graphic descriptions of untimely demises for people and various horrible injuries that are inflicted on other people. So be aware that we are into a slightly sinister world, but at other times they can be very funny as well, because they are ordinary people and their problems. So I've said curse tablets, but what is a curse tablet? This is a classic photo of what the majority of our curse tablets look like. So we've got 2,000 published texts, and we've got roughly another 2,000 unpublished text. That number is, as you can imagine, going up and up all the time as they're found in various excavations or by metal detectorists, which is always quite interesting. So these are lead sheets, and these examples have been rolled. They were found at the Temple of Celis Minerva at Bath in Britain, so in kind of southwest Britain from the Roman period. And this is an example from Carthage, so other side of the Mediterranean, so in modern Tunisia, just outside modern Tunis. And this one is, I always include this as my kind of what is a curse tablet example, because it's so unusual. It's a weird one. So it's written in Punic. So that's the language of the ancient Carthaginian people. And it's dated to the 3rd century BCE. And we have hundreds of curse tablets from Carthage, but they're all in Latin, and they're all from roughly the 3rd century CE onwards. So all these hundreds of years earlier, we've got one published example and one example that's too fragmentary to be published. And it just makes me think about whether there are other curse tablets that were being created in the interim, and it's an idea that's continued in that place, or whether it's something that's reintroduced by the Romans. That's like a current really interesting research question for me. But this example, you can see we've got a picture. It's actually a scan, a black and white scan, because that helps show up the writing a bit more. And you can see how tricky the handwriting is, even when we've got the kind of reproduced text next to it. And then we've got a translation. And this is a fairly standard sort of call for justice that we can find on some curse tablets. So we've got the person who's created the tablet, we've got their name, we've got the goddess who they've invoked, and we've got the name of the victim. And basically the victim's being cursed because she has rejoiced at the expense of the person who's created this curse tablet over the amount of money that they've lost, and they want that person cursed. And I think that is, do you know what? We've all felt pretty upset when someone's mocked us and laughed at our expense. I personally wouldn't go so far as making a curse tablet, but if you feel you've got nowhere else to turn to and you want to make a more permanent appeal to a deity rather than just a prayer, this is probably the best way to go about it. So this is literally what a curse tablet is. We've got a definition that most people who work with curse tablets follow. So it's from Jordan, David Jordan, who was the preeminent scholar in curses. He is famous for publishing lots, and he sadly died a couple of years ago. But his definition is defictiones, more commonly known as curse tablets, are inscribed pieces of lead, usually in the form of small, thin sheets, intended to influence by supernatural means the actions or welfare of persons or animals against their will. Animals is included there because we've got lots of curse tablets which curse racehorses, which is quite something. So we've got the name of lots of ancient Roman racehorses, which is fab because that kind of detail isn't recorded in lots of our other sources, but lots of them are called things like Speedy Feet and Dasher and stuff. So there's a theme with names even through to today. Anyway, so Jordan expanded this definition, saying that there now seems to be no reason to exclude tablets on material other than lead. So we can have curse tablets on bits of wax. We've got one very late example that's on a human rib, but we've got them on papyrus, bits of ceramic, lead, obviously, paper, some on parchment. I think there's one on vellum. So kind of a curse tablet sort of makes us think of what we would traditionally describe a tablet as, but the majority are just written curses on some kind of medium. But I think the important thing is that they are meant to have a slightly more physical and permanent nature rather than, say, an oral curse, which is slightly more ephemeral. You send it off into the world, and as you finish your utterance, it's over. Whereas these are designed to stay. And I think that's important when we think about how we engage with them. It's a ritual moment from the decision to make a curse tablet all the way through to the selection of the media, to the inscribing of the letters, and things like that. The majority of our surviving curse tablets, as you can imagine, are on lead because it's not a perishable medium. So that will skew our statistics about what curse tablets are made of, but just so you're aware, there are lots of other mediums that have survived and will probably use that haven't survived so well. So curse tablets, we find them from all over the modern Mediterranean. So my definition that I rattle off is that we have curse tablets found in all the modern countries surrounding the Mediterranean, as well as Portugal, Germany, the United Kingdom, Austria, Switzerland, Brussels, the Netherlands, Ukraine, Russia, and I think there's some in Slovenia as well that have just been published. So we're talking about basically all of the countries that were part of ancient Greece, so up into the Black Sea region, across to Sicily and into Italy, but then also all of the provinces of the Roman Empire, so across the top of North Africa and then into Northern Europe as well. So we've got this like fantastic geographical spread of curse tablets, and they are made for over 1,000 years. So our earliest examples come from Sicily, and they're made in the late 6th century BCE, and they're all mostly concerned with legal cases and cursing opponents in legal cases. And then our latest examples are the majority sort of stop in the 7th century. And then we've got one random example from the 10th century, and then another from the 11th. And I include those two as curse tablets, but they are a little bit unusual because they're written on, one's on vellum and one is on parchment. But I would say they follow a similar pattern to curse tablets. So I would include them, but they seem to be outliers, and the majority kind of drop off is like the 7th century CE. So again, we've got this huge chronological and geographical scope. We've got these very interesting ideas that come up then for how are people engaging with this, because they start in an ancient Greek context, and by the time we finish using them, we are in a medieval context. We've got different gods being invoked. We've got different languages being used. We've got different ways of engaging with sacred spaces. We have different types of sacred spaces. And yet, this practice of writing down a curse continues. And I think that's so interesting, and probably speaks to something quite human in us, and in our desire to seek help from otherworldly powers. Things do change. As I say, the deities invoked change, and we do have a move away from asking the dead for help. But when the dead are asked for help, they're not always necessarily asked for help in like a malign way. So this is all, as you can tell, I think it's all so interesting and fascinating. But we've kind of covered these, what is a curse tablet? And I just wanted to introduce you to those kind of main categories. So we've got things described as erotic magic or love spells. I would say that there is very little love in these. They are mostly from North Africa, and these are some of the really sinister examples that you will find if you do a little bit of research on these. They are mostly dedicated to the stealing of other people's partners, so stealing of other men's wives or other men's husbands. We have erotic spells or love spells concerning men wanting women, women wanting women, men wanting men. So there's a really good mix of different kind of desires there. But the ones that are particularly seem to be written by men are kind of pursuing women that can be particularly violent. They can call for the women to feel physical burning until they leave their husbands and families and come to this other man. So they're the ones that can be particularly sinister. But they're also quite late. So they're from about the 3rd century CE, we start to see these. The legal spells, as I mentioned, they're some of the earliest. So legal curses start in Sicily, and the majority of our surviving examples come from ancient Athens, as you can imagine. And most of these are either, this person's going to speak against me in court, curse them so they cannot remember their speech. Sometimes they're written in scrambled letters, and this is meant to symbolize the scrambling of the speaker's thoughts. Sometimes they curse witnesses, so the witnesses won't be believed, or the witnesses will be unable to speak the truth, which I always think is interesting, this use of the word truth. Then we've got competition curses. They can be concerned with circus races, with things going on in the hippodrome, with gladiator fights, with singing competitions, with acting competitions. So there's a really good mix of those. And the kind of choral singing or acting competitions tend to come from the ancient Greek world. And then much later, from the 3rd century again, CE, we get these competition curses from Northern Africa and Rome and the big Roman cities, and usually tied to an amphitheatre site, which is really interesting. So they're deposited in locations which are linked to where the competition is going on. This category, prayers for justice, is in the academic world still a controversial category. And I should warn you all now that I have been accepted, and this view is accepted. I don't treat prayers for justice as different curse tablets, because in every way they look the same. They say the same things. They invoke the same powers. They just sometimes are more supplicatory in their language, other times not. So if you try and have prayers for justice as a separate category compared to curse tablets, you end up with this huge grey area in the middle. So I treat them as a subcategory of curse tablets. And these are normally invocations to the gods, basically saying, I've been wronged, I deserve your help, seek justice on my behalf, which is kind of why they're called prayers for justice. Then we've got business curses. These are typically a little bit more frequently found in the ancient Greek world, and they're to do with rivals in bronze working, in taverns. We have some that might have been written between prostitutes, like cursing each other and trying to steal each other's business. And then we've got miscellaneous tablets. So sometimes it's quite difficult to know why someone's being cursed. Sometimes their name can be all that's on the tablet. At other times, it's just, I curse so-and-so, and we have no idea as to why they're being cursed. But there's quite a large group, these ones that we can't quite discern what the kind of driving force behind them was. And these categories, as I put at the bottom, they've been imposed by ancient historians to try and make this big body of evidence a little bit more navigatable and quantifiable. But we do have lots of tablets that don't just fit into one of these groups. And sometimes, like I said, with these business curses, these curses that might be by prostitutes against rivals, that interpretation appears to have come about through the decision that they're business curses. I think there could be like interpersonal rivalries from friendship and things like that. And as I've just mentioned, we do have curse tablets that are just a name, or just with the kind of verb I curse, and then the name of the victim. And there is very strong evidence for the fact that there was like an oral element to this cursing. So the recitation of a part of the spell. So it could have been the reading aloud of the tablet, or it could have been a little bit more elaborate. And in our later magical papyri that come from Egypt, which our surviving copies date from like the 4th century CE, but there's a little bit of evidence that they're quite a lot earlier, their content's quite a lot earlier. They include instructions as to how to make a curse tablet. And some of those have long spells like this that you're meant to read out. And then the actual text of the curse tablet is tiny. So there's definitely something being said alongside the deposition of these tablets, but what that is varies between individuals. And I think probably varies depending on where these curse tablets are deposited. So they can be deposited into graves, and the majority of our curse tablets are found in graves for younger people, so people that have died before their time, because they seem to be a particularly powerful dead to ask for help from. But we also get them deposited in sanctuary settings, sometimes thrown into fire, sometimes thrown into water. We also get examples of curse tablets from domestic settings, from amphitheatres, so close to places of people's business or work. And we end up with a couple of very random things, like sometimes they're thrown into rivers, so we find them on riverbeds. Sometimes they end up in wells, whether they're originally deposited in wells or whether areas are cleared and the wells are full of rubbish is a point of controversy. It seems that quite a lot of them are treated as rubbish when spaces are cleared. So this gives you an idea. It's quite a random thing, making a curse tablet. There aren't many set rules, and there's lots of potential for personal decision making. And at the same time, there is always a sense of having that final step of putting that curse tablet somewhere that is significant to you or to the deities you've invoked. So we're kind of welcome to the world of curse tablets, and I'm sorry if some of you knew all that already, but hopefully it's been a little bit of revision, and for other people, welcome to this fantastic body of elements. So a body of evidence. So the kind of crux of today is talking about how we read curse tablets, and this is an example of a curse tablet that you can find in a book. This is from a journal article published by David Jordan. It's not very helpful, but we get a sense of what the text is on the inscription, so we can see it's in Greek. We get a sense of how many lines. We get a sense of whether or not it's fragmentary. We get a little bit of a sense of the fact that it's written on both sides in some cases. And also we get a sense on this one of these different things. So characteres is not written in Greek, it's written in italics. So these are symbols that are being included on these tablets. And also at the bottom and here, we've got potential different interpretations of words. So we're already getting a sense of this being quite a difficult text, but we get no sense of what the actual curse tablet looks like, which
Oh,
you'd have thought was so important because we're dealing with physical object. Luckily, I have a picture for you of what this one looks like. And as you can see, it's a random shape. So this is a drawing that Jordan himself did. And you can see that this tablet is laid out in a really weird way. We've got these symbols at the top, these characters, which are richly significant, but not necessarily meaningful to us. They might not have had like an understandable meaning. They were probably just included for their kind of ritual significance. And then we've got our Greek. And this helpfully includes a height and width for this weird shaped tablet. But lots of the time we don't get that. But so how do we get from a piece of lead, which is quite difficult to read, to this nice drawing, to this nice reproduction of the text with line numbers and things like that? And that's kind of what we're going to be talking about today. So welcome to the world of epigraphy. I love this world. I am proudly an epigraphist. It can be a little bit of a nightmare. So that's why I'm really excited to be talking to you all today and kind of sharing the way in. I'm going to show you into this world, and we're going to talk about how the epigraphic conventions work and how we read them as we're reading a text, so we kind of have an idea of what's going on. But basically in epigraphy, there's kind of key ways of producing an edition of a text. So we've got photos, we've got drawings, we've got squeezes, we've got different types of transcriptions, and we've got these Leiden conventions. So that's how we're going to work through it. And we're going to do normal inscriptions on stone and lead ones as well. So, because not all of these work, which is what makes it tricky. So photographs of inscriptions can be really handy. Oh, my images. The problem with photographs is that we don't have lots for inscriptions that have been damaged. So many inscriptions have been moved to museums and lost where those museums have been damaged. Many have weathered. So just taking a photograph of an inscription can be very difficult in itself. If it is in situ and we can take a photo of it, great. But then you've got shadows casting some of the letters into obscurity. And then we try and take it from a different angle. And then some of the other letters come up in a slightly different way. Or there might be lumps in the stone, which obscure bits. So inscriptions, stone inscriptions in particular, were designed to be interacted with in the flesh by human beings. So taking an image that flattens them and presenting that to the world as if that's exactly what the inscription looks like can be really difficult. When we're talking about lead, it's even worse, because these lead inscriptions, when they are first inscribed, the letters are shiny against the dull, kind of more oxidized surface of the lead. But after a while, the whole thing oxidizes and you just end up with a photo of something gray. And you might be able to pick out individual letters. And I've got some more photos of lead inscriptions later, so we'll see what I mean. But it can be very helpful because a photograph is an objective truth. It's a version of the truth. It's not the whole version. But all these other ways of publishing an inscription that I'm going to talk about rely greatly on individual interpretation and decision making. So if we talk about drawings like this one I've just shown you, we have to trust that there are these little nicks in this top left-hand corner. We have to trust that this angle is so extreme around the bottom and that there is this chunk missing at the bottom and that these letters are so squished. We've got no way of verifying this. We've got no photographs of this tablet. We can't go and see it in the flesh. This tablet, sadly, missing, it's somewhere. It's described as being in a storeroom, so we can't get to it. So we have to have a lot of trust in this. We've got to have faith that the characters are that much bigger than the individual Greek letters. However, this is far more useful than a photograph for trying to understand which letters are where, because on photographs most of the time we can't tell because of this tricky texture of the lead. With stone inscriptions, things can be a bit more clear-cut, but again, you've got to have faith that it's an accurate reproduction. And if the person who's interested in the stone inscription is more interested in the inscription of the words rather than the decorative elements, Sometimes they don't have to include the decorative elements at all because that's not what they're trying to publish. So again, we're having faith in this personal interpretation. Now, a squeeze. I love a squeeze. You have to have permission to create squeezes, particularly of things in situ. And a squeeze involves the use of non-acidic, almost like blotting paper. It's quite thick, so it can deal with getting very, very wet. And then you have to have a special squeeze brush, which looks like a dustpan and brush, but with long, fairly soft bristles. But it's got to be wooden and with a heavy wooden handle. And then you get your paper very, very wet, saturated, normally in a big tray. And then you place it on top of the inscription. If your inscription is standing up, you can imagine it's really quite tricky. And then you have to thwack it with the brush over and over again. And as you can see, a problem is that you do get little rips in the paper. But this accurately recreates the surface of the stone. So there might be some letters that show up much more clearly on a squeeze than on the inscription itself. So in both of these examples, you can see they're both marble. They're both beautiful coloured marble. One of them has the remains of red lettering, red paint on the lettering, but that's a 1980s insertion. That's not original. But anyway, they are quite tricky to read, some of these letters. It would have been easier in the sunlight. And when you're dealing with them face to face, you can use a torch beam to rake light across them at different angles, and you get a sense of what letters are there. But you can see on the squeezes, they are so clear. You can see every single letter. You can see the distance between every single letter. You can see how some of the impurities on the stone have come up, particularly on the left-hand example. On the right-hand example, you can see exactly where the holes are that we used to attach this plaque to a wall. You can see exactly where the break is. So a squeeze, great. You can roll it up and take it with you. And also, they're very easy to digitize. You scan the front, you scan the back, and you've got these nice crisp images of exactly what's going on the surface of a stone. And there's huge digitization projects in America at the moment doing some fantastic work to bring these inscriptions to a global audience, which is brilliant. So as you can tell, I love a squeeze. And aside from the difficulties of saying, excuse me, please, can I whack your important monument a few times? One of the biggest issues is it only works on things that can get very wet, so stone, things that have quite deep inscriptions, and things that are big enough to whack with a brush, because you tend to get one standard size squeeze brush. So for a lead curse tablet, it's an absolute disaster because the letters can be very, very lightly scratched onto the surface, and they don't deal well with being wet. Most museums don't let you get them wet. And it's kind of a fruitless effort because sometimes they're very, very tiny. And so you can't get enough detail. You'd almost need like a little kind of toothbrush size brush, but then it's not heavy enough. And as I say, because the letters are so lightly inscribed, it still doesn't work. So this is fantastic. And certainly, you know, there is a reason why it continues to be a kind of the first port of call for an epigrapher, an epigraphist, but it doesn't work on all inscriptions. The nice thing about this is, though, that if you're doing a drawing of an inscription, you can take your squeeze, you can scan it, and you can present that along with your drawing. And you've got kind of the photo and the squeeze presenting versions of the truth. And then you've got your drawing as well, which might add in elements and is kind of your interpretation. So I said there were different types of transcriptions, and this is where it begins to get a little tiny bit technical. So any questions at the end, of course, I welcome them. And I have also sent out with Irene a kind of a PDF, which has lots of this information on as well. So if I go too quickly, don't panic, we can revisit it. And also there are some supporting materials. So the first we're going to talk about is a diplomatic transcription. Now, we've seen one of these before. And when I first showed you this example, this would be a diplomatic transcription. So we have a line by line layout. So everything that's on the first line is on the first line. Everything that's on the second line of the inscription is on the second one. It follows that quite nicely. everything is aligned to the left, irrespective of what's going on the tablet. So sometimes we have text called bostrofadon, which go one way and then the other way. It literally translates as the ox plows, yeah. But on a diplomatic transcription, it would just be like that. There's side numbering, usually every 5 lines. And often all the characters are just all in the uppercase or all in the lowercase, particularly with Latin and Greek inscriptions. It literally echoes what's on the stone. So if all the letters of all the words are in one long line, then we don't split them into words at this point. We're literally just copying them out as we can see them on the surface of the stone. So we don't include any accents or breathings or punctuation unless that's on the stone. As some of the Leiden convention siglia are used. So if it was bostrofadon, we'd have arrows illustrating which way the text was running, but it's not set up to follow the Leiden convention in the same way. This is almost the first port of call after a drawing or a squeeze. It's literally writing down exactly what's on the stone. Lots of people don't publish diplomatic transcriptions because they're not super helpful. They give us a sense of the surface of the stone, but I would argue not more of a sense than we would get from a photograph or from a squeeze or a drawing. So an interpretive transcription is what most of us will see and what most of us will engage with. Again, we've got the line by line layout. We should have the line by line layout, I should say. We've again got the left alignment. We have side numbering, usually every 5 lines, but more typically it's becoming every line has a number. There's the use of upper and lowercase letters. So for example, proper nouns will have a capital first letter and then lowercase letters for the rest of the word. The words are separated. Accents, breathings, and punctuation are included for the help of the reader. All of the Leiden conventions are followed, and there are the inclusions of restorations. So where letters are missing, they're reinserted. Abbreviations are expanded. Corrections are included. So particularly with curse tablets, because they're handwritten texts, you get some wild spellings. It's great. And you can tell that it's phonetically makes sense if you said a certain word with an accent, but our idea of like proper spelling of Latin and Greek words isn't always followed. So those errors will be corrected for the ease of us as modern readers of these inscriptions. So, as I said, this is normally the form that we find inscriptions in, and this is how we see them published. So, I'm now going to talk about the Leiden conventions. These are so important. If this is the only bit that you take away from this, I will be very proud. I feel like I've done good work for the day. But these conventions have been around since 1931. So you wouldn't have thought that sharing the correct use of these conventions was a big deal anymore, but it is, because they're still not followed properly. And lots of curse tablets in particular were published in, well, the main curse tablet collections were published in 1898 and 1904. So over 100 years ago, and some of them have not been republished, so we only have them in their form. And clearly they predate these conventions. So lots of times we can see them published not following these conventions. And I would say the biggest problem for us as readers is that they don't follow these conventions in the most basic way. So we're not sure whether letters are being inserted or deleted or are superfluous but have been included for clarity. We don't know, because they're using the same symbols in different ways. And moving forward, if we look towards the digital age, we have such a hugely exciting opportunity to make use of machine learning to restore fragmentary inscriptions. That can only happen if we follow one set of conventions for how the symbols are used. We can only teach a computer one way. We can't be like, oh, well, sometimes this, but sometimes that, but you just have to know which is which. No, that's not going to work, is it? And this is done using something called epidoc, which follows the Leiden conventions, but makes it into computer speak. So the Leiden conventions are what we use, and it's what everyone will use after this, because you're going to make me really proud. So that was my moment on the pedestal, my soapbox. these are conventions used to provide information about the state of preservation of an ancient text in a form that's easily understood for modern readers. They were set out in 1931, and they were introduced to avoid the mess that I've just been telling you about. And they were actually codified by papyrologists. Now, this, as you can imagine, might be a little bit of a problem if we're talking about something set up by papyrologists who are talking about the surface of a papyrus document versus people talking about what's going on the surface of a stone versus me talking about what's going on a piece of lead. But we kind of deal with this quite well. And they are adopted for Greek and Latin papyrology and epigraphy in the most part, but other disciplines are following. So things like Old English inscriptions are continuing to use the Leiden conventions, mainly because with this eye towards the future, you want to be able to share knowledge across disciplines, but you also want your text to be computer readable and searchable. So this is kind of the way it seems to be going, is the Leiden conventions are taking over, which is great and very useful for us all. Now, I'm going to talk you through them. There are a lot, but we're going to do the main ones. To be fair, there are some slight problems. So there are variations between epigraphy and papyrology. Luckily for us, I'm an epigraphist. That's all we're dealing with today. There are some differences between Greek and Latin, which is fine if you're only dealing with monumental inscriptions. If you're like me and you're dealing with text in Greek and Latin and Coptic and Celtic and, you know, various other languages, this is a bit annoying. And I've kind of made decisions in discussion with the people that have set up Epidoc as to what we're going to follow and why for the publication of curse tablets. And there are differences between the two big epigraphic publications. So the SEG, some of you might have come across, and BE. BE is kind of coming around to the SEG way of doing things. But I just want you to be aware, this is kind of very esoteric knowledge. But if you do go out into the world of inscriptions, be aware that there are some varieties and tricky bits, but we'll be fine. So this is the exciting bit, and this is the bit that I'm really keen to share with you. These are the main conventions that I'd like you to kind of have an understanding of and take away. And as I said, they're all on this PDF. So if you've got square brackets, the letters in those square brackets have been restored by the editors. So they were there originally, but we can no longer see them. But because we know the words, or because it's a formulaic text, we know what was there. So they have been restored with certainty that they were originally there. Then you've got these curly brackets. These are letters that have been added in error. So perhaps a double S where there should only be a single S, an IE when there should just be an E, for example. So the I that's extra would be in the squarely bracket. So it illustrates to you something that's on the stone, but it's telling you that it's an error in some way. So it's a spelling error, or maybe they've accidentally copied the same thing twice or something like that. But you can already see that these are personal interpretations, because is it in error, or is it something that we don't fully know or understand? Then we've got pointy angle brackets, and these are letters added which have been omitted. So for instance, if you only have one S but it should be a double S, one of those S's would be in these angle brackets. And then you've got just curvy normal brackets. They are letters which complete words that are abbreviated. So in Latin inscriptions, we have like dis manibus. Quite often it's just DM on the stone. So the D and the M would be just in normal writing. And then the IS and then animus would be in these curved brackets. So this is telling us that this is something that's not on the stone at all. So like the square brackets, it's not on the stone, but should be there to help our understanding. My favorite, and I don't get to use them very often, are these double square brackets. And these are spaces that have been deliberately erased. So names are quite typically fall into this category. So usually names of emperors who have been erased by the kind of following emperors who may or may not want that legacy to continue. And you'll have dots in there if you cannot tell what these letters are at all. But sometimes, usually with the help of a squeeze or by using torchlight, you can pick up hints of letters and they'll be included in these double brackets. So these tell you there is something on this stone, something interesting has happened here. We either don't know what it says or we think it might say that, but it's basically like approach with caution because this is quite heavily restored. Then we've got the little underdots, and these are letters which we think it looks like a C. It probably is a C. A C would make sense in this word, but it is a bit fragmentary, so we put a dot underneath. And this is one of the trickiest ones because to you, it might be perfectly obvious it's a C, but if you ask your friend who's out in the field with you, they might be like, oh, well, is that at the beginning of a crossbar? Could it be an E? And you think, no, it's obviously a C, and you don't put a dot underneath it. But that is your interpretation. It's not a perfectly clear-cut letter, so it should have a dot underneath it. And then you've got underlining, and these are letters which were obvious and have appeared in previous editions, but you're now stood in front of the stone or looking at the tablet and you can't see them. So you illustrate that by putting this underlining. However, this is where things begin to get technical. There are some restorations of some monumental inscriptions, because, for instance, we have laws, particularly in the Roman Empire, that are decreed, inscribed, and put up in numerous cities. So we've got parallel copies of the same thing. And if you've got one very fragmentary copy, but 2 or 3 others, you would have thought you could easily restore what's on this fragmentary copy. But you need to make it clear that those letters aren't on that stone. And you would typically do that by underlining them in some cases. Other cases use the square brackets. So again, something that you need to be aware of, like there are just variations. But these variations are slowly being erased because you can't have this kind of ambiguity when you're trying to use machine learning on inscriptions. I promise it's not too much technical for much longer, but the next slide is. This is about lost letters. So you have brackets with a number in or a number of dots in. That tells you how many letters are lost if you can judge it. So you might have a very regular, very nice inscription that pretty much has a letter per square, or you can imagine them in a grid and you can tell, well, there's 3 letters above. I've got a gap here. There must be 3 letters before this bit. Other times you just don't know. There are ways of putting illegible letters, so dots in Greek or crosses in Latin. We're going with dots now generally. You can have dashes not in brackets, which is for an uncertain number of lost letters, so it could be many lines. You can have a V, an italicized V, which is a space, an empty space. So it stands for vacat, so like an empty space or vacat. And just a lowercase v is like illustrating that one space has been left blank deliberately. There's no erasure or anything, there's just nothing there. And then if you have vaca, it means the remainder of the line is uninscribed. So it's not like the line is broken, the stone is broken, it's just left blank. So as you can tell, there's quite a lot of hidden nuance here when you're reading something and you're just reading what you think the English says. These are tricky and very rare. So ligatures, not something we have a lot of in inscriptions, but it does happen occasionally in curse tablets. The letters can be added in antiquity to correct a text. So if they notice an error and they try and squeeze it in or it's slightly above the line, we would use little, almost like speech marks. If you have curvy brackets in front of the known letters, it's clearly not a contraction being expanded. That's omitted letters due to phonetic or grammatical reasons, and the editor has restored them. You've got letters corrected by the editor, so that could just be a misshaping of the letter. Sometimes readings are uncertain, so they put question marks in the brackets next to it. And occasionally, if you've got very, very long lines of text and it doesn't work having just one and then the first line, 2 and then the second line, because you've got like a run on, you would have the first line taking up however many lines on a document, and then a dash, a forward slash even. And then that would illustrate that that's the end of the first line. And then we could carry on with the next one. And that's a good way of illustrating that you understand what's going on the stone, and illustrating to the reader what's going on the stone. But it is less ideal than just having it really clearly laid out. So let's talk about in the field. Here I'm in a lovely cemetery in southern Devon here, where they've got a project to digitize the stones, just because there's some really interesting people buried there. And as you can see, I'm sat in front of this stone, and the very first thing I did was take a picture of it. And you see what I mean now about photographs. You can see it's a gravestone, and you get a really nice sense of the kind of bits missing, like there's chunks taken out of the right side. You get a sense that the stone is degrading. You get a sense of the fact that there are lines on the stone. So at the top, you've got some lichen, but underneath you've got the surface of the stone is slightly fractured and offset. And we can kind of read this. So we've got, maybe this could be an H, but we're not sure, but ERE, preceded by one letter, probably here. We know it's a graveyard, so that might make sense formulaically. We've got maybe an L, an I, an E, so like lieth or lies, but then yeah, lieth would make sense with what comes next. And then we've got maybe the, a 3-letter word in English, it's probably the. This next word is a little bit fragmentary and tricky, and then there's this line that comes down from the stone, which makes it even more difficult. Possibly the name Samuel. So as you can see, you can start to pick up on things. The next line down, we might have the word wife, and we can start to get into it, and we think, right, we've got our eye in, we're picking up letters. And in some ways, this is great, because it's like, okay, we're starting to read this. And in other ways, things are becoming more obvious to us because we've studied the stone. And so letters that are a bit unclear, we might not include that special underdot underneath. So here's my nice drawing. As you can see, epigraphic conventions must include the date, the time, and the place that we're doing that. And you can see I've tried to illustrate where there's bits of stone that are missing. I've tried to illustrate the shape of the letters, and the fact that, for instance, this on Samuel, this M is quite interesting, because you've got the downward stroke of the M, and then the curve, and then a space, and then the curve. It's not one solid letter. And again, with the U, we've just got the uprights. We haven't got the curved bottom. So this would be like the illustration that we've published alongside the photograph, to give people an idea of the form of the writing, the spacing of the writing on the stone, the state of the stone. I am not a very gifted artist, though, as you can tell from this. So this is why we would have pictures and drawings. And then here's 2 transcriptions. So we've got a dot under the H, because it would make sense. We believe it could well be an H, and it makes sense formulaically, but it doesn't look like an H, all things considered. And I've gone with here lieth the body. And we can see, yeah, that looks a bit like a B, an O, and a D, but there is no Y that I can see. But there is this fracture on the stone, so it's probably lost. And then we've got this name that I'm not sure I can quite make out. I think it could be, it looks a bit like loud, but the L having that long bottom line would be out of proportion with the rest of it. And then we've got her wife, potentially, who departed this, and we would expect world to be there. That would fit in that space, but it could be Earth, we don't know. So that's got to be in square brackets. And then I've got my question marks, because I'm not sure about what is there. So you can see these kind of steps in the field, how that comes about. I have included this image because I thought we could talk through this one together. It really nicely illustrates the difficulties when producing something like this. So I'm sure you're all at home going, well, yeah, and we can see again this formula of like, here lieth the body of, and then we've got Richard Jarvis of, and then we've got something that looks like Rick, and it's the name of a place, a nearby place. And so of this parish, who departed this life the 25th day of May, 1782. And you might be able to see that then it says aged, I think 77. I'm so sorry that I was like peering at that then and you've got my face peering at it. So that's not too tricky. But there is a whole other half to this inscription, and it's a little bit of a mess because it was added afterwards. And you can barely see it in this photograph. And this is kind of my like warning with photos. So the problem with this photo is it's taken with the sun from this angle, so we're not getting the sun straight on. A torch would have helped. Raking light photos would have helped. I should have taken hundreds of photographs up close to produce a 3D image of it for people so they can interact with the surface of the stone. But the second half of the inscription, so that's the first, a bit bigger. You can now see at the top there's some addition here of a name, and you also can see this beautiful swirly detail on there on the H. Here's the bottom of this, and it's really difficult, isn't it, to ascertain exactly what's being said. And then at the bottom you've got dead grass that's stuck to it. You've got a lot of lichen, black lichen, which is the worst for trying to read stones through. But this is the most interesting part of the inscription, and I actually have a reproduction here. So in this church, we've got "Here lieth the body of Richard Jarvis," so we've got that right, "of Rickham, this parish." So Rickham is like a 5-minute walk down the hill, is a little hamlet, "who departed this life on the 25th day of May, 1782, age 77. And this is the bit, so "through poison," and we can kind of start to see this, "through poison, strong, he was cut off." So we're starting to see this, aren't we? And brought to death at last. It was by his apprentice girl, on whom there's sentence paid. Oh, may all people warning take, for she was burned at the stake. So this is a really important inscription because it brings forward the potential last burning of a witch at the stake in Devon by nearly 100 years. But isn't it so interesting that final bit, that little bit of an inscription, it's so difficult to read even in person. It's so difficult to read in a photograph. As you can see, it's almost impossible. If you just glanced at that photograph in a volume of all these gravestones that have been published, you would miss the most interesting bit. You just think, oh, that's sad, but he lived to 77. That's a good age at that point. But here's the sinister side to it, which I think is very cool and interesting. And also, I think really nicely highlights my theme that is, we've got to be careful about how we interact with other people's evidence for inscriptions, other people's photographs, other people's drawings and things. So that's kind of my introduction to the technical side of reading inscriptions and my reiterated warnings. So let's talk about curse tablets. This is one of the best photographs I could find of a curse tablet ever. And I mean, I've got 2,000 to choose from, but you can see if someone published that photograph, you'd be like, oh yeah, I get a sense of scale. It's not very helpful saying scale is 2:1 because I've then taken a photo or a scan of that photo and it's no longer 2:1. So actual dimensions would have been better. But you can see the handwriting. You can get a sense that it's quite neat handwriting. The drawing helps further. And then we've got these two different transcripts. So you can see the use of the underdots in the first one, but it's all lowercase. You can see the fifth line is marked. You can see that all the lines run together. And then you've got the restored text where we've got the capitals for proper nouns. We've got the corrected letters. We've got letters being inserted and deleted because of the use of the different angles. But as you can see, it's quite a sinister one. So in this example, which is from the 3rd century CE, it's from Roman Britain, it's from Bath, again in southwest England. And this is against perjury. So anyone who stood there and taken an oath in a sanctuary setting is being cursed. So this is more of a conditional curse. If anyone's done wrong, they will be cursed, rather than most of the others, which are binding curses, which is someone has done wrong, therefore curse them. And this plea that the victim pays for their crimes in their own blood is very common in Roman Britain, but not so common elsewhere, which again is interesting if we think about the fact that this is a shared tradition over many hundreds of years and thousands of miles. There is still interesting nuances in different places, and people could make their own decisions as to what to inscribe. Again, we've got a really cool one, and this is one of my favorite examples. So you can see in this drawing that the handwriting is politely a mess. You can see, and I really like how this is done. This doesn't follow any kind of conventions, but the holes in the text in the surface of the lead tablet are marked by these dotted lines. And I just think that makes it much, much clearer, because otherwise it could be lines of letters. You know, Latin is difficult. Latin handwriting is really difficult. Latin handwriting written backwards is even more difficult. So if we just look to this picture, we can try and pick out letters, but it's not very easy because it's written backwards. So we get that from the diplomatic transcript at the top here. So here we have this, and this shows us that it starts backwards. So this final word here is begun all the way up here. So this su gentilis, su Christianus, is right down here. So we can kind of trace it back then. So this is meant to be an S, an E, a U. This is then meant to be G. So we can start to like spot letters that way. And here we've got that nice use of vacat to illustrate that the rest of the surface here isn't being filled, but it's not broken. You can see that there's the underdots. So this second, well, the third, fourth, fifth letter along the top, sorry, that was, you enjoyed my terrible counting there, is fragmentary, but the editor in this case, Roger Tomlin, has restored the U, and that would make sense. And I just think, you know, we've talked through the different ways of creating a transcription. This really nicely illustrates how difficult it is. I've said lots of times, well, people have to make decisions. You have to decide whether it's clear or not. And that all seems fine. And we've looked at English inscriptions and we know what the formulaic language is. We know if there's 3 letters together, it's probably the word the. But this is literally written backwards. And so the decisions being made are not necessarily like malicious or designed to be misleading. People are trying their best, but it is just difficult medium. But this is an early 4th century curse tablet from Bath. And it literally starts with whether pagan or Christian. So this is the earliest inscription, the earliest inscribed attestation of the term Christian in Roman Britain. We have one other stone inscription that uses the term. So I'm here spreading this wonderful evidence with you. So whether pagan or Christian, whomsoever, whether man or woman. So whether man or woman, whether slave or free, is a really common formulaic phrase. So you can see some of it's had to be restored, but we can restore that with accuracy. So for instance, servus, the U is fragmentary, it's got a dot underneath it. The ER has been inserted by the editor. But this is a very formulaic phrase. It is the only thing that makes sense in this setting. So that is a strong restoration. And all of this is over 6 silver coins, which have been taken from the person who's created the tablet's purse. And the goddess is being asked to extract the silver coins from the thief. And it's quite sinister. So there's a list of potential names, so potential victims, and they're included. But the fact that the whole thing is written backwards is really interesting. Is it because it's being deposited in a sanctuary setting where other people might see them? Who knows? So let's just, I've got lots of examples here because I thought we could just see how fragmentary they are and how difficult it is to illustrate what's going on the stone. So some concluding thoughts for you all. The process of creating an edition of an inscription is full of personal interpretations. Understanding the Leiden conventions means we can read the surface of an inscription. And curse tablets are a really difficult type of inscription. They've got lots of unusual elements, such as the material, such as the depth of the strokes, and it makes them very difficult to produce a useful edition of. Photographs aren't very clear, drawings are personal interpretations. So I hope you've enjoyed that and it wasn't too technical and overwhelming for everybody. So thank you for your time, though.
I absolutely adored it. Thank you so much. I love all the technical elements, and I think it gives us a lot of, it helps us to have a sense of humility and also curiosity when we're looking at all of these materials. Right.
I apologize. It was a long talk. I didn't realize. I just got very carried away.
No, I mean, I thought it was just fantastic. There is a question in the chat, which I do not know the answer to, but not about curse tablets, but about
witches in England. Well, this is what I think is really interesting, because in England, traditionally, the argument is that they were hung from the neck until dead, not burned at the stake. Whereas we've got lots of Scottish sources that talk about the burning of witches. So is this gravestone hyperbole? Is it not? I don't know. I don't know the technical nature, but I will happily look into it because it's so interesting. And as you can imagine, this gravestone is in it's not just in rural Devon, it's in rural Devon. The easiest way to get to it is by boat. It's like that ridiculous, by boat and up a steep hill. So I wonder whether this kind of evidence could be analysed a bit more. As you've said, heretics were burned. So whether there's that side to it, I don't know. Yeah, really interesting. Good question, though.
Yeah. And then there's a few more questions. Could the backwards writing be part of the spell?
Yeah, absolutely. We've got some Greek examples which say, as these letters are scrambled, may their speech be scrambled, or the brain of the victim becomes scrambled. We've got other examples where just the names of the victims are scrambled. So it's just that bit that's jumbled. And so the rest of the text is nice and clear for the, I think it's the gods that are invoked on that one, which is really interesting. So yeah, it's definitely ritually significant and makes it much harder. So you get weird mistakes that creep in because someone's trying to write something backwards, which is a difficult thing to do.
Right. Yeah. And then you mentioned there was.
Oh, the human rib. That's in Coptic. I've said that was such. Yeah, it's in Coptic. It's in Mayer and Smith's ancient Christian magic book. But I can send you the reference to it if you'd like, as well as the text. So that was much later. I think it's like 5th century, but yeah, written in Coptic. Oh, the first curse tablets that got me hooked. I was a bit rogue. When I went to university, I was meant to be doing physics and then ended up doing ancient history on results day. It was a bit of a curveball and wonderful. Obviously, it's worked out very well and I'm very pleased with it. But on my first in Birmingham, they do things a bit differently. You have lectures and seminars, but you also have things called projects where there's a small group of you that are in the classroom together learning about a topic, almost, I think it was like 8-1 with the lecturer. So there'd be like discussions and lectures kind of combined. And it was about swearing oaths. It was called Swearing and Cursing in Ancient Athens. And it was about the oaths and how important they were. It was about conditional curses. So if you break your promise, I curse you to suffer. And then in the very last session before the Christmas break, curse tablets. And I just was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I was like, well, we have texts from normal people writing about normal things. We have texts written by women complaining about things, saying someone's accused me of murdering my husband, goddess help me. I'm like, if this woman's found guilty, she literally, the punishment is death. So she's pleading for the goddess to help her, to save her life, whether or not she did kill her husband is kind of neither here nor there. But where else do you get a text like that? So as you can imagine, I was like, oh. And then one of the essay questions was about curses. I was like, I'm gonna answer that one. And that's how it started. And that was in like 2013. So here we are 10 years later, still talking about them, which is, yeah, amazing. Oh, this charge for murder or petty treason. It could have been, particularly at that point in history. It's weird for, it's like 1782, isn't it? It's weird for an inscription from 1782 to be concerned with witchcraft. Even weirder for the geographical location. However, this is about like 1300 years outside of my area of expertise, so I could be completely wrong with that. But thank you for your fab questions.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. It's so wonderful to hear, just to learn something that we wouldn't normally, if we're not doing the work, we just wouldn't have an opportunity to know. Really the depth and even these technical elements, I think, are so important for us to understand and remember. And then think about, even with translation, when we have a full-ish text, right? What is it that we don't have access to that might be impacting the way that we translate it? So I'm very happy for this opportunity. Thank you so much, Charlotte. Thank you.
Oh no, thank you. Because yeah, we're literally talking about dots and dashes that are so easy to like skim over, particularly if we're just reading a translation. I'm just like, but they're really important.
Yeah, they are. They really are. Yeah, so any more questions? Thank you so much, everyone, for sending them in with the chat. All right, then. Thank you again for coming. Thank you, Charlotte, so very much for enlightening us today. And everyone, next week, hope to see you again. Next week is going to be me and Lauren Howman, who will be joining me to discuss Phaedrus and the purpose of education. Hope you can join us. Have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank you
you.
again.